Hey everyone, before we dive into tonight's story, if you enjoy these deep dives into history's mysteries, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more content like this. Now, let's step back in time together. You wake up to the sound of 1,000 voices echoing across a plaza larger than anything you've ever seen. The year is 1050 CE, and you're standing in the heart of Cahokia, a city so massive it makes your hometown look like a gas station parking lot. Welcome to North America's greatest urban centre, where 50,000 people call home. Spoiler alert, in 200 years this place will be emptier than a McDonald's ice cream machine. Your feet touch the packed earth of the Grand Plaza, a space so enormous it could fit 35 football fields. Around you, the greatest civilization north of Mexico bustles with an energy that would put Times Square to shame. The morning mist rises from the Mississippi River in the distance and the smell hits you. Wood smoke, cooking corn, and that distinct scent of too many humans living too close together. It's like Comic-Con, but with more mud and fewer people arguing about Marvel movies. To your left towers Monk's Mound, an earthen pyramid that makes you crane your neck until it hurts. This isn't some small hill your dog would ignore. It's 0 feet tall, covers 14 acres, and contains 22 million cubic feet of earth. Someone moved that dirt one basket at a time, without machines, without wheels, without even horses, just human determination, and probably a lot of complaining about back pain. The plaza stretches before you like an ancient airport terminal, filled with people from dozens of different tribes. You hear languages that sound like nothing you've ever encountered, see clothing styles that range from practical to absolutely stunning. Copper gleams from jewellery, shells from distant oceans catch the morning light, and everywhere you look, there's evidence of trade networks that span half a continent. A group of children runs past you, playing a game with wooden sticks and a ball, their laughter mixing with the deeper sounds of adults conducting business. Market stalls line the edges of the plaza, offering everything from freshly caught fish to pottery so fine it would make your grandma jealous of someone else's china cabinet. But here's where it gets weird, and by weird I mean absolutely mind-bending. This entire city, this massive urban centre that rivals medieval Paris in size and complexity, this place that represents the pinnacle of Native American civilization, it's going to vanish. Not destroyed by war, not buried by volcanic ash, not wiped out by some Hollywood-style disaster. It's just going to empty out like everyone simultaneously decided to delete their social media accounts and move to the countryside. The people who built Monk's Mound moved more earth than the builders of the Great Pyramid of Giza. They created a city that lasted longer than the United States has existed. They developed agricultural techniques so advanced they were growing corn varieties that wouldn't be seen again for centuries. And then, sometime around 1300 CE, they just left. You watch a ceremony beginning near the base of Monk's Mound, where elaborately dressed figures perform rituals that connect earth to sky, past to future. The drumbeats pulse through the ground beneath your feet, a rhythm that has been repeated for generations and will continue for generations more, or so everyone thinks. The irony would be hilarious if it weren't so haunting. While Europeans were struggling through the Dark Ages, this place was experiencing a golden age of art, architecture and agriculture. While Vikings were discovering America and immediately leaving because it was too much work, Cahokia was building sewage systems and planning urban development that wouldn't look out of place in a modern city planning textbook. But something is coming. Some combination of factors that historians still argue about today. Climate change, political upheaval, resource depletion, social transformation, or maybe they all just got tired of city traffic and decided rural life was more their speed. What makes Cahokia's disappearance so fascinating isn't just that it happened, but how completely it happened. This wasn't a gradual decline where you can follow the breadcrumbs of decay. This was like a magic trick where 50,000 people said "ta-da" and vanished into the American landscape, leaving behind only mounds and mysteries. You step into the morning flow of Cahokia's rush hour, and it's nothing like the gridlock you're used to. Instead of cars honking, you hear the rhythmic splash of paddles as dozens of canoes navigate the tributary that runs right through the city. The urban planning here would make modern city designers weep with envy. They built an entire canal system, that makes Venice look like a kiddie pool. Your breakfast isn't a grab-and-go coffee situation. You're holding a bowl of corn porridge that's been flavoured with nuts and dried berries, and honestly, it tastes better than most of what you'd find in a trendy health food cafe. The corn isn't just any corn. This is a specially developed variety that produces larger kernels and higher yields than anything Europeans have ever seen. While your ancestors across the ocean were still figuring out how to grow enough grain to survive winter, Cahokians were basically running agricultural boot camps. The streets, and yes, they have actual planned streets, are laid out in a grid pattern that would make any urban planner proud. This isn't some random medieval maze where you need GPS to find your way home. Someone sat down with what was essentially a giant ruler and said, "We're going to organise this chaos." The main avenues run north-south and east-west, creating neighbourhoods that each serve different purposes. You pass through the artisan quarter, where specialists are creating goods that will travel thousands of miles. A woman carefully shapes pottery with designs so intricate they look like ancient Instagram filters. Another craftsperson is working copper into shapes that gleam like ancient bling. The skill level here isn't amateur hour. These are people who've spent decades perfecting their crafts, creating items so beautiful and functional that archaeologists centuries later will stare at them in museums and wonder how they did it without modern tools. The trade network centered in Cahokia stretched from the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico, from the Rocky Mountains to the Atlantic coast. You're looking at an economic system that spans half a continent, all coordinated from this one spot in what will someday be called Illinois. Items flow in and out of this city like data through the internet, except instead of cat videos and conspiracy theories, it's copper from Lake Superior, shells from Florida, and obsidian from Yellowstone. But here's the thing that would blow your mind if you really understood it. This entire economic powerhouse is about to disappear more completely than your motivation to exercise after New Year's. The trade networks will collapse, population will scatter, and within a few generations this place will be so forgotten that European explorers will walk past these massive mounds and assume they're natural hills. You climb one of the smaller mounds, and by smaller, I mean it's still bigger than most buildings you've ever been in. From up here, you can see the true scope of this place. Mounds stretch to the horizon in every direction, each one representing thousands of hours of human labour. Some are burial mounds for important people, some are platforms for houses and ceremonies, and some seem to exist just because someone said, "You know what this place needs? More hills." The view reveals something that makes archaeologists argue in academic papers to this day. This city was planned. Not just the obvious stuff like streets and neighbourhoods, but astronomical alignments that connect earthworks to celestial events. Whoever designed Cahokia wasn't just thinking about traffic flow and property values. They were creating a landscape that connected their daily lives to the movement of the sun, moon, and stars. A group of traders passes below you, their backs loaded with goods that represent weeks of travel. They're heading out on trade routes that connect dozens of cultures, carrying not just physical items but ideas, stories, and innovations that will influence development across the continent. It's like a medieval internet, except instead of fibre optic cables, they used rivers and footpaths. The complexity of what you're witnessing is staggering. This isn't a simple farming village that got a little bigger. This is sophisticated urban civilization with social hierarchies, specialised occupations, long-distance trade, monumental architecture, and population densities that won't be seen again in North America until the 1800s. And yet, in historical terms, it's about to vanish faster than your paycheck after bills are due. You descend from the mound and walk into what can only be described as Cahokia's version of social media drama, except instead of Twitter beef, it's all happening face-to-face with actual consequences. The social hierarchy here is more complex than your family's WhatsApp group dynamics, and just as confusing to outsiders. At the top of this ancient social pyramid sits the Great Sun, a leader whose authority combines political power with religious significance. Think of them as having the influence of a president, the reverence of a religious figure, and the lifestyle of a celebrity influencer, all rolled into one person who lives on top of Monk's Mound like it's a medieval penthouse suite. Below the Great Sun, you've got nobles who live on smaller mounds throughout the city. Each mound represents not just a house, but a statement about social status that's visible from miles away. It's like having your net worth displayed as the height of your building, except instead of paying rent, your ancestors spent generations hauling dirt to build your social media profile into the landscape. The commoners, which includes most of the 50,000 people you see around you, live in neighbourhoods arranged around plazas, each functioning like ancient apartment complexes with shared community spaces. The houses are impressive enough that European peasants would have considered them luxury accommodations. Wooden frames, thatched roofs, and enough space for extended families to live comfortably. No one's sleeping on the floor because they can't afford furniture. But here's where it gets interesting in that way that makes historians excited and normal people confused. The social structure isn't just about who has the biggest mound. It's about specialisation on a level that rivals modern cities. You've got full-time potters, toolmakers, farmers, traders, construction workers, religious specialists, astronomers, and probably the prehistoric equivalent of accountants keeping track of all the corn and copper flowing through the trade networks. You watch a ceremony unfolding in one of the smaller plazas, where someone who's clearly important is wearing more copper ornaments than a Renaissance fair enthusiast. The crowd's response tells you, this isn't just a random Tuesday activity. This is serious business involving the kind of ritual knowledge that takes decades to master. These aren't people playing dress-up. These are specialists who've devoted their lives to understanding and maintaining complex spiritual and social systems. The gender dynamics are more progressive than what you might expect from your history textbooks that focused on European societies. Women here can own property, conduct trade, and hold positions of religious authority. Archaeological evidence suggests that some of the most elaborate burials belong to women, indicating that social power wasn't automatically limited by gender, the way it was in many other societies. Children run through the plaza playing games that are simultaneously fun and educational, learning skills they'll need as adults while having the kind of carefree childhood that makes you nostalgic for simpler times. Except these times aren't actually simpler, they're just organised differently, with social safety nets built into extended family and community structures rather than government programmes. The economic system operating here is so sophisticated it makes your brain hurt to think about the logistics. Without writing systems, without currency as Europeans understood it, without horses or wheeled vehicles, they're coordinating trade networks that span thousands of miles. It's like running Amazon using only human memory, river transportation, and a lot of trust between trading partners. But the shadow of the future hangs over all this complexity like a plot twist no one sees coming. Within 200 years, this entire system will collapse so completely that when Europeans finally show up, they'll find scattered tribes who have stories about the old ones, who built the mounds, but no direct memory of how this massive urban civilization actually functioned. The reason historians still argue about Cahokia's disappearance isn't because we lack evidence. It's because we have too much evidence of different possible causes. Climate change shifted agricultural patterns. Political upheavals may have destabilized the social hierarchy. Economic changes might have disrupted trade networks. Social movements could have challenged the authority structures that held the city together. Or maybe, and this is the possibility that keeps archaeologists awake at night, the people of Cahokia made a collective decision that urban life wasn't working for them anymore, and chose to return to smaller, more sustainable communities. Imagine an entire civilization basically saying, "This city life is too stressful, we're moving to the suburbs." You wake up in your Cahokian home, and the first thing that hits you isn't the smell of coffee brewing, because coffee won't exist in your world for another 400 years. Instead you smell corn, lots of corn. So much corn that if you were a modern person, you'd probably assume you'd been kidnapped by the Kellogg's Corporation and forced to live in a cereal factory. The corn situation in Cahokia is honestly more impressive than anything you've seen in a modern grocery store. While Europeans are still struggling with grain varieties that barely produce enough to survive winter, Cahokians have basically invented agricultural engineering. You're looking at corn that produces kernels twice the size of anything growing elsewhere on the continent. It's like they took regular corn and gave it a serious workout routine. Your breakfast isn't just corn, it's a carefully planned, nutritional strategy that would make modern dietitians weep with envy. You've got corn porridge mixed with beans and squash, creating what nutritionists call a complete protein. Without knowing anything about amino acids or nutritional science, your culture has figured out how to create a diet that provides everything the human body needs. It's like accidentally inventing the perfect health food, or just trying not to starve. The agricultural system supporting the city is so advanced it borders on the ridiculous. Three Sisters agriculture, corn, beans and squash planted together, creates a natural fertilizer system where each plant helps the others grow. The beans fix nitrogen in the soil, the corn provides a natural trellis, and the squash leaves create ground cover that retains moisture and prevents weeds. It's permaculture designed by people who never heard the word permaculture. But here's where it gets weird in that way that makes archaeologists argue in academic papers for decades. The amount of corn required to feed 50,000 people would need agricultural land stretching for miles in every direction. We're talking about farming on a scale that requires coordination between dozens of communities, standardized planting schedules, shared storage facilities, and distribution networks that would make modern supply chain managers impressed. You walk through the residential areas where families are preparing their morning meals, and the variety of food preparation techniques is staggering. Corn is being ground into flour, fermented into beverages, roasted for portable snacks, and processed into dozens of different forms. Some houses have underground storage pits that can preserve corn for years. Others have sophisticated drying racks that turn fresh corn into something that won't rot during the humid Midwestern summers. The cooking technology isn't just functional, it's art. The pottery being used for food preparation and storage shows designs so intricate they look like they belong in a museum, which ironically is exactly where most of it will end up after this civilization disappears. These aren't people making basic survival tools. These are artisans creating beautiful, functional objects that serve both practical and ceremonial purposes. Your morning walk takes you past communal cooking areas, where large-scale food preparation happens for festivals and ceremonies. The fire management techniques are so sophisticated that they can maintain consistent temperatures for hours without modern thermostats. They've figured out how to smoke meat, bake bread, and boil stews using nothing but wood, pottery, and centuries of accumulated knowledge. The trade networks bringing exotic foods into Cahokia are mind-blowing in scope. You can find saltwater fish from the Gulf of Mexico, wild rice from the Great Lakes, nuts and berries from forests hundreds of miles away, and specialty items that travelled trade routes spanning half the continent. It's like having access to an ancient version of international cuisine, except instead of ordering delivery through an app, someone walked 500 miles carrying your dinner on their back. But the shadow of the future continues to loom over this abundance. Something is going to disrupt this incredibly sophisticated agricultural system so completely that within 200 years, the population will scatter and the knowledge of large-scale farming will be lost. The corn varieties that took generations to develop will disappear. The trade networks will collapse. The communal cooking areas will fall silent. What makes this impending collapse so mysterious is that there's no obvious reason for it. The agricultural system is working perfectly. The food supply is abundant. The population is healthy and growing. Yet sometime around 1300 CE, people will simply stop maintaining the farms, abandon the storage facilities, and walk away from the most successful agricultural experiment in North American history. You step into what can only be described as the world's first mall food court, except instead of Sparrow and Orange Julius, you've got vendors selling exotic delicacies from across the continent. The central marketplace of Cahokia operates on a scale that makes modern farmers' markets look like a child's lemonade stand. The variety of food available here would shock any European visitor. If Europeans knew this place existed, which they don't, because they're still convinced the world ends somewhere around Iceland. You can buy fresh fish that were swimming in the Gulf of Mexico a week ago, transported via an ice and salt preservation system that won't be invented in Europe for centuries. There's wild rice from Minnesota, maple syrup from Michigan, and sea salt from coasts so distant that acquiring it requires a trade network rivaling the complexity of modern international commerce. Your shopping experience isn't just about grabbing ingredients and leaving. This marketplace is the social media of its time, the place where news travels, alliances are formed, and cultural innovations spread. A trader from the Rocky Mountains is demonstrating flint knapping techniques that produce obsidian blades sharper than modern surgical steel. Seriously, these stone tools are so precise that some modern surgeons prefer obsidian scalpels over metal ones for certain procedures. The economic system operating here uses a currency that's both practical and beautiful. Instead of coins, you're dealing with standardized shell beads that come from specific locations and require specialized manufacturing techniques. It's like Bitcoin, but instead of being mined by computers, it's created by artisans who spend months perfecting the drilling and polishing of shells that travelled thousands of miles to get here. But the real mind-blower is the seasonal availability of items that shouldn't be possible to preserve or transport. You can buy strawberries in winter thanks to a dehydration and storage process that maintains nutritional value for months. There are fermented beverages that would make modern craft brewers jealous, corn-based drinks with flavour profiles that range from mildly alcoholic to seriously mind-altering. Some vendors are selling what amounts to ancient energy drinks, caffeinated beverages made from plants that modern energy drink companies are just now rediscovering. The quality control standards here are impressive enough to make modern health inspectors weep with joy. Spoiled food is immediately identified and removed from sale. Storage areas are designed with ventilation systems that prevent mold and pest infestations. Food preparation areas are cleaned with techniques that prevent contamination. These people understand food safety principles that Europe won't figure out until after the Black Death kills a third of their population. Your shopping expedition reveals something that makes the impending abandonment even more mysterious. This isn't a struggling economy barely hanging on. This is a sophisticated market system that's thriving, expanding, and constantly innovating. New products are being introduced regularly. Trade relationships are growing stronger. The infrastructure is being improved and expanded continuously. The pottery vendors alone represent a level of artistic and technical achievement that rivals anything being produced anywhere in the world at this time. Some pieces show influences from cultures thousands of miles away, suggesting artistic exchange networks that span the continent. Others display innovations in firing techniques and clay preparation that produce ceramics so durable they'll survive burial for 1,000 years and still be functional when archaeologists dig them up. Yet within the next 250 years, this entire economic ecosystem will collapse so completely that future inhabitants of the area will have no memory of how it functioned. The trade routes will be abandoned, the specialized crafts knowledge will be lost, the standardized currency system will disappear. Markets that once served customers from hundreds of miles away will fall silent. The vendors you're buying from today represent the last few generations who will possess this knowledge. Their children might learn some of these skills, but their grandchildren will be living in small, scattered communities with no memory of the sophisticated urban economy their ancestors created. It's like watching the peak of a civilization that doesn't know it's already begun its decline, where every transaction you witness represents knowledge and connections that will soon be lost forever. You enter a Cahokian household during dinner preparation, and it's immediately obvious that these people have figured out meal planning on a level that would make modern Pinterest enthusiasts feel inadequate. The organisation and efficiency of food preparation here puts most contemporary kitchens to shame, and they're doing it without electricity, running water, or any appliance more complex than a really good grinding stone. The kitchen setup is ergonomically designed in ways that wouldn't look out of place in a modern cooking show. Work surfaces are positioned at the perfect height for different tasks. Storage containers are arranged for maximum efficiency. The fire management system allows for multiple cooking temperatures simultaneously. Someone has clearly spent generations perfecting the workflow of feeding a large family, and the result is beautiful to watch. Your dinner isn't just thrown together from whatever happens to be available. This meal has been planned weeks in advance, with ingredients stored and preserved using techniques that maintain nutritional value and flavour better than many modern methods. The dried corn has been processed to remove anti-nutrients and increase digestibility. The preserved meat has been treated with salt and smoke in combinations that prevent spoilage while enhancing taste. The cooking techniques being employed represent centuries of accumulated culinary knowledge. Stones heated in the fire are used to boil water in baskets, allowing for precise temperature control without metal pots. Clay vessels designed for specific cooking methods produce results that rival modern cookware. Fermentation processes create flavours that are complex and sophisticated. But here's what really blows your mind: the nutritional planning. Without any formal understanding of vitamins, minerals, or balanced diets, Cahokian meal planning provides complete nutrition that supports healthy development and long lifespans. The combination of foods ensures adequate protein, prevents nutritional deficiencies, and provides enough calories to support the intensive physical labour required for monumental construction projects. The social aspects of meal preparation and consumption are equally sophisticated. Different family members have specialised roles that maximise efficiency while teaching younger generations essential skills. Children learn food preparation techniques through hands-on participation, ensuring that knowledge passes from generation to generation. Elderly family members contribute their accumulated knowledge while remaining productive members of the household. Seasonal meal planning shows an understanding of nutritional needs that varies throughout the year. Winter foods are designed to provide more calories and fat to support health during cold months. Summer meals emphasize foods that help maintain hydration and energy during intensive agricultural work. Spring and fall menus take advantage of seasonal ingredients while preparing for the nutritional demands of the coming season. The preservation techniques being used are so effective that some families have food stores that could sustain them for multiple years of poor harvests. Underground storage pits maintain consistent temperatures and humidity levels that prevent spoilage. Dried. Foods are packaged in ways that protect them from insects and moisture. Fermented items develop beneficial bacteria that improve digestive health. Yet within a few generations, much of this accumulated culinary knowledge will be lost. The specialised cooking techniques will be forgotten. The preservation methods will no longer be practised. The nutritional planning that supported a population of 50,000 will be replaced by subsistence strategies designed for much smaller groups. The tragic irony is that this food knowledge represents one of humanity's great achievements in sustainable nutrition. These techniques could feed large populations without depleting natural resources or damaging the environment. The agricultural and culinary systems working together created food security that most civilizations never achieve. But something is coming that will cause people to abandon not just the city, but the entire sophisticated lifestyle that created it. Families that have perfected meal planning and food preparation over generations will walk away from their kitchens, their storage facilities, and their accumulated knowledge, leaving behind only archaeological evidence of what was once America's greatest culinary tradition. You wake up in Cahokia to discover that the social hierarchy here makes modern corporate structures look like a kindergarten playground. The person at the top isn't just a CEO or president. They're considered a divine intermediary whose decisions can literally control the weather, ensure good harvests, and maintain cosmic balance. No pressure there. Your position in this society isn't determined by your college degree, your startup experience, or how many followers you have on social media. It's based on a complex system of birth, achievements, spiritual knowledge, and connections that would make modern networking events look like amateur hour. The Great Sun at the top of Monk's Mound doesn't just have executive power. They're believed to be related to the actual sun in the sky. The religious specialists in this society have job responsibilities that would make modern life coaches and motivational speakers jealous. They're responsible for maintaining the relationship between the human community and the spiritual world, which includes everything from ensuring successful harvests to predicting eclipses to communicating with ancestors. It's like being a combination priest, scientist, therapist, and weather forecaster, all rolled into one position that requires decades of training. The complexity of religious knowledge required for these positions is staggering. You need to memorize astronomical cycles that span decades, understand the spiritual significance of architectural alignments, know the proper ceremonies for dozens of different occasions, and maintain relationships with spiritual entities that require specific offerings and protocols. It's like having to master a university curriculum that includes astronomy, psychology, architecture, agriculture, and diplomacy, except there are no textbooks and everything must be memorized perfectly. But here's where it gets interesting in that way that makes anthropologists excited. The religious system isn't just about controlling people through supernatural fear. It's a sophisticated social technology that coordinates the activities of 50,000 people without written laws, police forces, or bureaucratic institutions. The ceremonies and rituals serve as communication systems that organize everything from planting schedules to construction projects to trade relationships. Your daily life is punctuated by religious observances that serve multiple functions simultaneously. A ceremony honouring the corn harvest isn't just spiritual gratitude, it's also a food distribution system, a social gathering that reinforces community bonds, a display of wealth and status, and an educational event where younger generations learn essential agricultural knowledge. It's like combining church, school, government meeting, and block party into one efficient social institution. The astronomical knowledge embedded in religious practices is so accurate it rivals modern scientific understanding. Religious specialists can predict eclipses, track planetary movements, and calculate seasonal changes with precision that enables effective agricultural planning. The layout of the city itself serves as a giant calendar and astronomical observatory, with earthworks and buildings aligned to capture and mark important celestial events. The social power of religious positions creates a meritocracy based on intellectual achievement and spiritual development, rather than inherited wealth or military conquest. People can advance in the religious hierarchy through demonstrated knowledge, successful predictions, and effective leadership of ceremonies. It's like a career path based on combining scientific understanding with social skills and public speaking ability. Yet the religious system that holds this entire civilization together is about to face a crisis that will cause its complete collapse. Something will happen that undermines people's faith in the religious authorities' ability to maintain cosmic balance and social order. Whether it's climate change, political upheaval, or failed predictions, the spiritual foundation of Cahokian society will crumble so completely that people will abandon not just the city, but the entire religious system that created it. The irony is heartbreaking. A religious system sophisticated enough to coordinate the activities of tens of thousands of people, accurate enough to predict astronomical events, and effective enough to maintain social order for centuries will simply stop working. The knowledge will be lost, the ceremonies will be forgotten, and the spiritual technology that built America's greatest ancient city will disappear into archaeological mystery. You're standing in the Grand Plaza during what can only be described as the ancient equivalent of a viral social media event, except instead of watching it on your phone, you're surrounded by thousands of people experiencing it live. The social dynamics playing out in front of you are more complex than anything you'd find in a modern high school cafeteria, and the stakes are considerably higher than who gets to sit at the cool kids table. The ceremony unfolding involves elaborate displays of wealth, status, and spiritual power that serve as both entertainment and political communication. Think of it as ancient theatre combined with a political rally, religious service and fashion show, all happening simultaneously in front of an audience that includes representatives from communities hundreds of miles away. The messages being communicated through costume, dance and ritual will influence trade relationships, military alliances and diplomatic negotiations across half the continent. Your position in the crowd isn't random, it's carefully orchestrated based on your social rank, community affiliation, and relationship to the participants. The seating arrangement itself communicates political information to anyone who knows how to read the social codes. Who stands where, who sits on elevated platforms, who gets to participate directly, and who remains in the audience all convey messages about power structures and social relationships. The performers aren't just putting on a show, they're demonstrating their qualifications for leadership positions through displays of knowledge, skill, and spiritual connection. A single ceremony might determine who gets promoted to higher positions, who maintains their current status, and who might face social demotion. It's like a job interview conducted in front of thousands of people, where your performance determines not just your career prospects, but your family's social standing for generations. The costumes and regalia being displayed represent wealth accumulation that rivals anything you'd see at a modern awards show. Copper ornaments from Lake Superior, shells from Florida coasts, exotic feathers from tropical birds, and intricately woven textiles that required months of work to create. Each outfit tells a story about trade relationships, artistic exchanges, and economic connections that span the continent. But the real complexity lies in the social networking happening during these events. Conversations taking place in the crowd are negotiating marriages, trade agreements, military alliances, and diplomatic relationships that will influence regional politics for years to come. Information is being exchanged about weather patterns, crop yields, population movements, and resource availability across dozens of communities. The youth watching these ceremonies are receiving education that combines entertainment with essential knowledge transmission. They're learning about their history, their social obligations, their spiritual beliefs, and their place in the larger community structure. It's like attending school, but instead of sitting in classrooms, they're participating in community-wide experiences that make the lessons memorable and meaningful. The gender dynamics displayed during these ceremonies show a level of equality that would surprise people who assume ancient societies were universally patriarchal. Women hold important religious positions, participate in political decision-making, and display their own wealth and status through elaborate costumes and ceremonial roles. Some of the most prominent leaders visible during these events are women whose authority extends far beyond their local communities. Yet these sophisticated social institutions are about to face a crisis that will cause their complete breakdown. The ceremonies that once coordinated activities across the entire region will stop happening. The social networks that maintained relationships between dozens of communities will collapse. The knowledge transmission systems that educated generations of young people will be abandoned. Within 200 years, the Grand Plaza where you're standing will be empty. The social media system that connected communities across half the continent will be replaced by smaller, more isolated social networks. The complex political relationships managed through public ceremonies will be forgotten. The most sophisticated social technology developed in ancient North America will simply vanish, leaving only archaeological evidence of what was once humanity's most successful experiment in large-scale social organization. You discover that networking in Cahokia makes modern professional connections look like child's play. The social systems operating here are so sophisticated that they coordinate relationships between individuals, families, communities, and regions in ways that create opportunities and solve problems more effectively than most modern institutions. It's like LinkedIn, but instead of endorsing people for synergy and thought leadership, you're managing relationships that determine access to exotic trade goods, marriage partners, and specialized knowledge. Your family's social capital isn't just about who you know, it's about who knows you, who owes you favors, who trusts you with sensitive information, and who would vouch for your character in negotiations with strangers. These relationships take generations to build and can be destroyed by a single social mistake. The stakes are considerably higher than missing out on a job opportunity. Social isolation in this world can mean economic disaster and physical vulnerability. The networking events happening regularly in Cahokia serve multiple functions that modern business conferences only dream of achieving. A single gathering might include religious ceremonies, trade negotiations, matchmaking consultations, knowledge exchanges, and entertainment, all structured to maximize relationship building between participants. People travel hundreds of miles to attend these events, and the connections made here influence regional politics for decades. The professional specializations available in Cahokian society create career paths that require both technical expertise and social skills. Master craftspeople don't just need to know how to create beautiful pottery or sophisticated tools, they need to understand the social significance of their work, the cultural preferences of different communities, and the political implications of their artistic choices. It's like being a combination artist, diplomat, and business owner. The mentorship systems operating here ensure that specialized knowledge passes from generation to generation while adapting to changing circumstances. Young people aren't just learning technical skills, they're being inducted into professional networks that span the continent. The relationships formed during apprenticeships create lifelong connections that provide access to resources, opportunities, and support systems throughout their careers. The conflict resolution mechanisms built into social institutions prevent minor disagreements from escalating into community-destroying feuds. Formal procedures exist for mediating disputes, compensating for damages, and restoring social harmony after conflicts. These systems work so effectively that a population of 50,000 people from dozens of different cultural backgrounds can live together in relative peace and prosperity. The information sharing networks operating through social connections create early warning systems for natural disasters, resource shortages, and political instability. News travels through relationship chains faster than modern communication systems, and the accuracy is maintained through social accountability mechanisms that penalize people who spread false information. It's like Twitter, but with consequences for misinformation that actually matter. The social mobility possible within this system allows individuals to advance based on merit, achievements, and relationship-building skills rather than just inherited status. People can improve their family's social standing through excellence in crafts, successful trading ventures, effective leadership, or spiritual development. It's not a perfectly egalitarian society, but it offers more opportunities for advancement than most ancient civilizations. Yet this entire social ecosystem is about to collapse so completely that future inhabitants of the region will have no memory of how it functioned. The relationship networks that took centuries to develop will be abandoned. The professional specializations that required decades to master will be lost. The social technologies that coordinated the activities of tens of thousands of people will simply stop working. The tragic irony is that Cahokian social institutions solved problems that modern societies still struggle with. How to coordinate large populations without oppressive centralized control. How to maintain cultural diversity while ensuring social cohesion. How to create opportunities for advancement while maintaining stability. These solutions will be forgotten so completely that when Europeans finally arrive, they'll find scattered tribes with no memory of the sophisticated social systems their ancestors created. You climb to the summit of Monk's Mound on a clear morning around 1100 CE, and the view that spreads before you represents the peak of North American civilization. What you're seeing isn't just a large city, it's the capital of what amounts to an ancient empire that influences culture, economics, and politics across half the continent. From this vantage point, you're looking at the most powerful and sophisticated society that will exist in North America until the United States industrializes 800 years later. The urban landscape stretching to the horizon contains more people than London or Paris at this time. The city planning is so advanced that it won't be matched in North America until the late 1800s. The population density, infrastructure development, and economic complexity rival anything existing anywhere in the world during the 12th century. You're standing on top of what is essentially the New York City of the medieval period, except it's located in the middle of what Europeans think is an empty wilderness. The view reveals the true scope of Cahokian influence. Satellite communities extending for miles in every direction, each connected to the central city through trade routes, political alliances, and cultural exchanges. The settlement pattern shows urban planning that coordinates the development of dozens of communities into a unified metropolitan area. It's like looking at an ancient megalopolis that encompasses an area larger than many modern cities. The monumental architecture visible from Monk's Mound represents construction projects that required the coordinated labour of thousands of people over multiple generations. Each mound you can see represents millions of basket loads of earth moved by human labour, organised through social systems sophisticated enough to maintain motivation and coordination for decades-long projects. The engineering knowledge required to build these structures rivals anything achieved by contemporary civilizations in other parts of the world. The agricultural landscape supporting this population demonstrates farming techniques that won't be surpassed in North America until mechanized agriculture. The field systems, irrigation networks, and crop management strategies visible from your elevated position show scientific understanding of soil management, water conservation, and sustainable farming that most modern farmers would find impressive. They're feeding 50,000 people without depleting natural resources or causing environmental degradation. The trade networks coordinated from this location connect communities from the Rocky Mountains to the Atlantic Ocean, from the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico. The economic influence of Cahokia reaches into regions that won't be politically unified again until the creation of the United States. Raw materials flow into the city from thousands of miles away, and finished products flow out to influence cultural development across the continent. The artistic and intellectual achievements represented by the material culture, visible from Monk's Mound, show creative and technical sophistication that rivals the great civilizations of medieval Europe and Asia. The pottery, metalwork, textiles, and architectural innovations being produced here represent centuries of accumulated knowledge and artistic development that places Cahokian culture among the world's great civilizations. Yet you're witnessing the peak of something that's about to begin its irreversible decline. Within 200 years, the view from Monk's Mound will be drastically different. The satellite communities will be abandoned. The trade networks will collapse. The population will scatter. The monumental construction projects will cease. The agricultural systems will be abandoned. The city you're looking at today represents the culmination of centuries of cultural development, technological innovation and social organisation. It's the result of generations of accumulated knowledge, successful adaptation to environmental challenges, and effective solutions to the problems of large-scale social organisation. Yet all of this achievement is about to be lost so completely that future inhabitants will have no memory of what was accomplished here. Standing on Monk's Mound during Cahokia's peak is like being present during the height of the Roman Empire or the Golden Age of Athens, witnessing a moment of human achievement that will be remembered as one of civilization's great accomplishments. Except this achievement will be forgotten almost entirely, lost to historical memory until archaeologists rediscover it over 600 years later. You step into the Cahokian communication network, and it's immediately obvious that information travels through this society faster and more efficiently than most modern small towns manage today. The message system operating here makes medieval European communication look like sending smoke signals through a thunderstorm. News from the Rocky Mountains reaches Cahokia in weeks, not months, and the accuracy of the information remains intact despite travelling through dozens of relay points. The communication infrastructure isn't based on technology, it's based on social relationships so sophisticated that they create redundant information pathways spanning thousands of miles. Traders, diplomatic envoys, religious pilgrims, and family networks all serve as communication channels that cross-check each other's information for accuracy. It's like having multiple internet service providers, except instead of fibre optic cables, you're using human relationships and footpaths. Your morning in Cahokia includes hearing news that's surprisingly current considering the distances involved. A volcanic eruption in Mexico has affected trade routes, causing shifts in obsidian availability that will influence tool-making decisions for months. Weather patterns in the Great Lakes region suggest changes in wild rice harvests that will affect food planning next year. Political developments in communities hundreds of miles away have implications for diplomatic relationships and military alliances. The speed and accuracy of this information network enables economic and political coordination on a scale that shouldn't be possible without modern communication technology. Market prices for exotic goods adjust to supply and demand changes happening in distant regions. Diplomatic negotiations take into account political developments across the entire sphere of Cahokian influence. Military strategies incorporate intelligence about resource availability and population movements from across the continent. The knowledge preservation systems operating within this communication network ensure that important information doesn't get lost when key individuals die or communities face disasters. Critical knowledge about agricultural techniques, religious practices, astronomical observations, and historical events is maintained through multiple overlapping memory systems that provide backup and verification. It's like having cloud storage, except the cloud is made of human brains. The quality control mechanisms built into the communication system prevent misinformation from spreading and causing problems. People who consistently provide inaccurate information face social consequences that limit their access to the network. News sources are evaluated based on their track record, relationship to the events they're reporting, and consistency with other information sources. It's like having fact-checkers, except they're motivated by personal reputation rather than professional journalism standards. The educational functions of the communication network ensure that knowledge spreads throughout the society rather than remaining concentrated among elites. Information about successful innovations, effective techniques, and useful discoveries circulates to communities that can benefit from applying this knowledge. The network serves as a distributed university system that upgrades the knowledge base of the entire civilization. The entertainment value of the communication system makes information exchange enjoyable, rather than just functional. News is often presented through stories, songs, and performances that make it memorable and engaging. Current events become the subject of artistic creations that preserve information while providing cultural enrichment. It's like having news entertainment, except it's actually informative rather than manipulative. Yet this sophisticated communication infrastructure is about to face a catastrophic breakdown that will isolate communities and cause massive information loss. The social relationships that maintain the network will be severed. The trade routes that carry messages will be abandoned. The knowledge preservation systems will fail when the communities that maintain them disperse. Within a few generations, the communication network that once connected half the continent will be replaced by much smaller, more localized information systems. Communities that once had access to news from thousands of miles away will become isolated and uninformed about developments beyond their immediate region. The collective intelligence that enabled coordinated decision-making across vast distances will be lost, leaving individual communities to make decisions without access to the broader information context that once guided their choices. You enter the economic heart of Cahokia, and the complexity of what you're witnessing makes modern financial markets look like a child's lemonade stand. The trading systems operating here coordinate the exchange of goods, services and information across a geographic area larger than most modern countries, all without using money, written contracts or any of the institutions that modern economies depend on. It's like watching international commerce conducted entirely through social media, except the social media is face-to-face relationships, and the commerce actually creates value rather than just moving it around. The standardization of trade goods reveals economic planning that rivals modern international commerce. Shell beads are manufactured to precise specifications that ensure they maintain consistent value across thousands of miles and dozens of different cultures. Copper ingots are produced in standardized weights and purity levels that facilitate easy exchange. Even pottery and textiles follow design standards that communicate information about origin, quality, and cultural significance. Your participation in the Cahokian economy involves understanding exchange rates that fluctuate based on supply and demand factors spanning the continent. The value of Great Lakes copper depends on weather conditions affecting transportation routes. Gulf Coast shell prices reflect seasonal availability and the political stability of communities that control access to beaches. Rocky Mountain obsidian rates vary based on volcanic activity and the diplomatic relationships between trading partners. The credit systems operating here enable economic transactions that shouldn't be possible without banking institutions. Individuals and communities can obtain goods with promises of future payment, backed by their reputation and social connections. Long-distance trading ventures are financed through partnerships that spread risk and share profits. Investment in production facilities and infrastructure projects is coordinated through social mechanisms that allocate resources to their most productive uses. The quality control mechanisms ensure that products maintain the standards necessary for successful long-distance trade. Artisans who produce substandard goods face social consequences that can destroy their ability to participate in the trade network. Quality certifications are provided through guild-like organizations that maintain professional standards and provide training. Consumer protection exists through social accountability rather than government regulation. The innovation incentives built into the economic system encourage technological development and artistic creativity. Successful innovations are rewarded through increased social status and improved access to resources. New techniques and designs spread rapidly through the trade network, creating economic benefits for communities that adopt them quickly. Intellectual property is protected through social mechanisms that ensure innovators receive credit and compensation for their contributions. The economic insurance systems protect communities against disasters and resource shortages through mutual aid agreements that span the continent. Communities experiencing crop failures can obtain food through trade relationships established during abundant years. Natural disasters are mitigated through regional cooperation that provides emergency assistance and reconstruction support. Economic stability is maintained through diversified trade relationships that prevent dependence on single sources of critical resources. The labour specialisation enabled by the trade network allows individuals and communities to focus on producing goods and services where they have competitive advantages. Communities with access to specific resources develop expertise in processing them for trade. Individuals with particular talents can support themselves through specialised production rather than subsistence activities. The economic efficiency created through specialisation and trade supports population densities that wouldn't be sustainable through local resources alone. Yet this entire economic system is about to collapse so completely that future inhabitants will have no understanding of how it functioned. The trade networks that took centuries to develop will be abandoned. The standardization systems that enabled long-distance commerce will be forgotten. The credit mechanisms that financed economic development will disappear. The quality control systems that maintain product standards will cease to operate. The economic institutions that once coordinated the exchange of goods across half the continent will be replaced by much smaller, more localized systems that can't support the same level of specialization or population density. The economic knowledge that enabled efficient resource allocation and risk management will be lost. The most sophisticated pre-industrial economy developed in North America will simply vanish, leaving only archaeological evidence of what was once humanity's greatest experiment in non-monetary economic organization. You wake up one morning around 1150 CE and something feels wrong with the world. The weather patterns that have been reliable for generations are starting to shift in ways that make the agricultural calendar less predictable. It's not dramatic at first, just small changes that most people dismiss as normal variation. But the religious specialists who track celestial cycles and weather patterns are beginning to notice correlations that suggest something bigger is happening. The climate shift beginning to affect Cahokia isn't the kind of sudden disaster that makes for dramatic historical narratives. It's more like the slow temperature change that kills a frog in gradually heating water, subtle enough that each individual change seems manageable, but cumulative enough to eventually create crisis conditions. The growing seasons are becoming slightly shorter. Rainfall patterns are shifting. The reliable flooding cycles that support agriculture are becoming less predictable. Your agricultural planning, which has worked effectively for centuries, starts requiring constant adjustments that strain the social systems designed to coordinate farming activities. The Three Sisters agriculture that supports the population requires precise timing of planting and harvesting. When weather patterns shift even slightly, the coordination between dozens of communities becomes more difficult. Crop yields begin to vary more dramatically between different regions. The trade networks that depend on predictable agricultural surpluses start experiencing supply chain disruptions that cascade through the entire economic system. Communities that normally export food to Cahokia begin keeping more of their harvest for local security. The exotic goods that flow into the city in exchange for agricultural products become more expensive and less available. Economic relationships that have been stable for generations begin showing signs of stress. The religious interpretations of these changes create the first cracks in the spiritual authority that holds Cahokian society together. The Great Sun and other religious leaders are expected to maintain cosmic balance and ensure favourable weather conditions. When their ceremonies fail to prevent climate problems, people begin questioning whether the religious authorities truly have the spiritual power they claim to possess. The engineering challenges created by changing weather patterns begin to exceed the technological capabilities available to Cahokian society. Drainage systems designed for historical rainfall patterns become inadequate when precipitation increases. Agricultural infrastructure optimized for stable growing seasons becomes less effective when seasonal timing shifts. The massive construction projects that define Cahokian civilization become more difficult to coordinate when environmental conditions are less predictable. The population pressure that Cahokia has successfully managed for centuries becomes problematic when agricultural productivity decreases even slightly. The city has grown to the maximum size sustainable under optimal environmental conditions. When those conditions begin to deteriorate, the margin for error disappears. Food security becomes a concern for the first time in generations. The social tensions that emerge from environmental stress begin to strain the political institutions that have maintained stability for centuries. Different communities respond to climate challenges in ways that create conflicts over resource allocation. The cooperative relationships that built Cahokian civilization become competitive relationships that threaten its continuation. Yet the climate change affecting Cahokia is relatively mild compared to what many civilizations have survived successfully. The environmental challenges facing the society are significant, but not insurmountable. Other cultures have adapted to similar climate shifts without experiencing civilizational collapse. The question isn't whether the environmental changes are severe enough to destroy Cahokian society, but whether the social institutions are flexible enough to adapt to changing conditions. The tragic irony is that Cahokian civilization has the technological knowledge, economic resources and social organization necessary to adapt to climate change. The agricultural techniques, trade networks, and political institutions that built the society could be modified to function effectively under different environmental conditions. But adaptation requires changes in social systems that have become rigidly institutionalized over centuries of success. You're witnessing the moment when Cahokia's greatest strength, its sophisticated social organization, begins to become its greatest weakness. The very institutions that enabled the city to grow so large and powerful have become so complex and interdependent that they can't adapt quickly enough to changing circumstances. It's like watching a perfectly tuned machine start to break down because it's too precisely calibrated to function when operating conditions change. The social hierarchy that successfully coordinated the activities of 50,000 people has become so elaborate that decision-making processes take too long when rapid responses are needed. Simple changes in agricultural practices require approval from multiple levels of authority, consultation with religious specialists, and coordination between dozens of communities. What once ensured careful planning now prevents timely adaptation. The specialization that made Cahokian economy so efficient has created dependencies that become vulnerabilities when supply chains are disrupted. Communities that focused on producing specific goods for trade lack the diverse skills necessary for self-sufficiency when trade relationships become unreliable. Individuals with highly specialized knowledge can't adapt their skills when economic conditions change. The monumental architecture that demonstrates Cahokian power and spiritual authority requires constant maintenance and periodic reconstruction that demands enormous resources. When agricultural surpluses decrease and labour becomes more valuable for food production, the maintenance of public buildings and ceremonial structures becomes a burden rather than a source of pride. The monuments that once unified the community begin to compete with basic survival needs. The trade networks that brought wealth and exotic goods to Cahokia have created expectations for living standards that become difficult to maintain when economic conditions deteriorate. People accustomed to access to luxury goods from distant regions experience the reduction in trade as a decline in social status rather than a temporary adjustment. The psychological impact of reduced access to trade goods affects social cohesion. The religious system that legitimized political authority has made promises about cosmic control that become difficult to fulfill when environmental conditions change. The Great Sun and other religious leaders derive their power from their claimed ability to maintain harmony between human society and natural forces. When their ceremonies fail to control weather patterns or ensure agricultural success, their authority becomes questionable. The population density that demonstrated Cahokian success has created environmental pressures that become problematic when agricultural productivity declines. The concentration of 50,000 people in one location requires constant importation of food and resources from surrounding areas. When those imports become less reliable, the city's sustainability is threatened. The urban lifestyle that once represented civilization's peak becomes unsustainable. The political alliances that created regional stability depend on Cahokia's ability to provide benefits to subordinate communities. When the city can no longer offer the same level of trade opportunities, protection, and ceremonial services, the political relationships that maintain regional cooperation begin to deteriorate. Communities that once contributed to Cahokian power begin pursuing independent strategies. The knowledge systems that enabled technological innovation have become so complex that they're difficult to maintain when the communities that preserve them face economic stress. The specialized knowledge required for astronomy, engineering, agriculture, and crafts production depends on social institutions that can support full-time specialists. When those institutions face resource constraints, knowledge preservation becomes difficult, yet the problems facing Cahokia aren't unique or insurmountable. Many civilizations have successfully adapted to similar challenges by simplifying their social organization, diversifying their economies, and decentralizing their political structures. The solutions exist within Cahokian culture. The society has the knowledge and resources necessary to adapt to changing conditions. The tragedy is that institutional inertia prevents the changes necessary for adaptation. The social systems that enabled Cahokia's success have become too entrenched to change quickly enough to respond to new conditions. The very achievements that made the civilization great create resistance to the modifications necessary for survival. Success becomes the enemy of adaptation, and excellence becomes the path to extinction. You notice the subtle changes that mark the beginning of Cahokia's decline, not dramatic disasters, but small signs that the perfect system is starting to strain under pressures it was never designed to handle. The morning markets that once buzzed with exotic goods from across the continent now have empty stalls where certain vendors used to set up. The construction projects that once proceeded on schedule now face delays, as skilled workers are redirected to more urgent tasks like food production and infrastructure maintenance. The social fabric that held this massive urban experiment together is developing stress fractures that would be invisible to casual observers but are deeply concerning to people who understand how the system works. Families that have maintained trade relationships for generations are finding their partners less reliable. Communities that once competed to contribute labour for monumental construction projects are now making excuses to avoid their obligations. Your daily routine reveals dozens of small compromises that individually seem insignificant but collectively suggest systemic problems. The ceramic water storage jars that once lasted for years are being patched and repatched because replacement pottery isn't readily available. The specialised tools that made various crafts efficient are being substituted with less effective alternatives when trade relationships fail to provide specific materials. The religious ceremonies that once drew participants from hundreds of miles away are attracting smaller crowds as communities focus their attention on more immediate survival concerns. The elaborate costumes and ritual objects that demonstrated wealth and spiritual power are being simplified or repurposed for practical uses. The astronomical observations that once predicted seasonal changes with precision are becoming less reliable as weather patterns shift beyond historical norms. The construction workforce that built Monk's Mound and dozens of other earthworks is being gradually reassigned to agricultural projects and defensive preparations. The massive coordinated labour efforts that once demonstrated Cahokian power are becoming impossible to organise as communities prioritise local needs over regional obligations. The monuments that once inspired awe are beginning to show signs of deferred maintenance. The food distribution systems that once ensured no one went hungry are developing bottlenecks and inefficiencies. The storage facilities that once held surplus food for lean years are being depleted more rapidly than they're being refilled. The agricultural innovations that once supported population growth are proving inadequate when environmental conditions change even slightly. The communication networks that once coordinated activities across half the continent are experiencing delays and information losses. Messages that once travelled from the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico in weeks now take months or don't arrive at all. The social relationships that maintained these networks are being strained by economic pressures and competing priorities. The craft specializations that once produced beautiful and functional objects are being simplified to focus on basic necessities. The artistic innovations that once spread throughout the region are being abandoned in favour of more practical designs. The cultural exchanges that once enriched Cahokian society are becoming less frequent as communities turn inward. Yet none of these changes individually represents a crisis that threatens the civilization's survival. They're more like the early symptoms of a chronic disease, uncomfortable but manageable if addressed properly. The problem is that the social institutions designed to address such problems are themselves part of the system that's becoming less efficient. The tragic irony is that Cahokia still possesses all the knowledge, resources and organisational capacity necessary to solve these emerging problems. The agricultural techniques exist to adapt to climate change. The engineering knowledge exists to modify infrastructure for new conditions. The social institutions exist to coordinate adaptive responses, but the very success that built the civilization has created institutional momentum that resists the changes necessary for continued success. You wake up one morning around 1200 CE to discover that something fundamental has shifted in Cahokia, though you can't quite put your finger on what it is. The city still functions, people still go about their daily business, and the basic infrastructure remains intact. But there's a subtle difference in the atmosphere, like the moment in a party when the music stops, but nobody has announced that it's over. The change is most noticeable in the spaces between activities, the pauses in conversations, the hesitation before making decisions, the way people glance at each other when they think nobody's watching. It's as if the entire population is collectively holding its breath, waiting for something to happen without knowing what that something might be. The confidence that once permeated every aspect of Cahokian life has been replaced by a careful uncertainty that makes every interaction feel slightly awkward. Your morning walk through the residential districts reveals subtle signs of the shift. Families are spending more time in private consultation rather than participating in community activities. Children's games have become less elaborate and more focused on practical skills. Elderly people who once shared stories freely are now more selective about their audiences. The casual social interactions that once made Cahokia feel like a vast extended family have become more formal and guarded. The trade relationships that once seemed permanent are now being constantly renegotiated. Merchants who once made regular visits are now arriving unpredictably, or not at all. The standardized exchange rates that once made commerce efficient are being questioned and adjusted. The credit systems that once enabled long-term planning are requiring more immediate payment and shorter terms. The construction projects that once proceeded with confident momentum are now subject to constant review and revision. Work crews spend more time in planning meetings than actual building. Materials that once flowed steadily from suppliers are now arriving in smaller quantities and less predictable schedules. The monumental architecture that once grew steadily skyward is now experiencing more horizontal expansion and maintenance work. The religious observances that once followed predictable calendars are now being modified to address changing circumstances. Ceremonies that once focused on Thanksgiving and celebration are increasingly concerned with protection and guidance. The astronomical calculations that once provided certainty about seasonal timing are being supplemented with more frequent observations and adjustments. The educational systems that once transmitted knowledge confidently from generation to generation are now emphasizing adaptability and flexibility over traditional practices. Young people are being taught multiple skills rather than specializing deeply in single areas. The apprenticeship programs that once guaranteed career paths are now including more general training to prepare for uncertain futures. The political relationships that once seemed stable are now requiring constant attention and diplomacy. Alliances that once operated automatically are now being explicitly renewed and renegotiated. The tribute systems that once flowed predictably are now subject to negotiation and adjustment based on changing circumstances. Yet despite all these signs of uncertainty, life in Cahokia continues at a pace that would still impress visitors from other regions. The agricultural system still produces food surpluses. The craft specialists still create beautiful objects. The trade networks still connect communities across vast distances. The social institutions still maintain order and provide services. The problem isn't that anything has dramatically failed. It's that everything requires more effort and attention than it used to. The systems that once ran automatically now require constant management. The relationships that once operated on trust now require explicit agreements. The future that once seemed predictable now requires careful planning for multiple possibilities. You discover that information in Cahokia has become a currency more valuable than shell beads or copper ingots, and everyone is suddenly acting like a cryptocurrency trader protecting their wallet passwords. Knowledge that once flowed freely through social networks is now being hoarded, filtered, and strategically released. It's like watching a society-wide shift from open-source information sharing to proprietary data management, except the data is about crop yields and weather patterns instead of software code. The agricultural intelligence that once circulated openly between farming communities is now being closely guarded. Farmers who once shared information about successful planting techniques are now keeping their innovations secret. Weather predictions that once helped everyone plan their activities are now being shared selectively with trusted allies. Crop yield data that once contributed to regional food security planning is now being reported inaccurately to maintain competitive advantages. Your attempts to gather information for community planning now require complex negotiations and reciprocal exchanges. Simple questions about resource availability are met with cautious responses that reveal little useful information. The casual conversations that once provided updates about regional conditions now involve careful probing and diplomatic maneuvering. Getting accurate information has become a specialized skill requiring social connections and negotiating expertise. The craft knowledge that once spread rapidly through professional networks is now being transmitted more selectively through family lines. Master artisans who once trained apprentices from various communities are now focusing on their own relatives. Technical innovations that once enhanced productivity across the region are now being kept within specific workshops or trading partnerships. The trade intelligence that once enabled efficient market operations is now being compartmentalized and protected. Information about supply shortages is being concealed to prevent price speculation. Knowledge about new sources of raw materials is being restricted to establish partnerships. Transportation route information is being shared only with trusted associates who can provide reciprocal benefits. The political intelligence that once enabled effective diplomacy is now subject to disinformation and strategic deception. Communities are providing misleading information about their capabilities and intentions. Alliance negotiations are being conducted in secrecy with multiple simultaneous discussions. Military intelligence is being closely guarded even between traditional allies. The religious knowledge that once unified regional practices is now being interpreted differently by various communities. Astronomical observations are being kept secret or reported selectively. Ceremonial innovations are being developed independently rather than shared across the network. Spiritual guidance is being provided privately rather than through public ceremonies. The social intelligence that once maintained community cohesion is now being filtered through family and faction loyalties. Information about personal problems is being shared only within tight networks. Gossip that once served as informal social control is now being used strategically to advance particular interests. Marriage negotiations are being conducted in greater secrecy with more complex alliance considerations. This information hoarding creates cascading problems throughout the social system. Planning becomes more difficult when accurate data isn't available. Coordination becomes impossible when communities operate on different information sets. Trust erodes when people discover they've been deliberately misled. The social capital that once made cooperation automatic now requires constant verification and validation. The tragic irony is that the information being hoarded isn't particularly valuable. Most of it concerns routine matters that would benefit everyone if shared openly. But the act of hoarding itself creates scarcity and competition where none previously existed. The fear of being disadvantaged by sharing information creates actual disadvantages for everyone involved. Within 2 generations, this culture of information secrecy will contribute significantly to the breakdown of regional cooperation that once made Cahokian civilization possible. Communities will become increasingly isolated and uninformed about developments beyond their immediate area, making coordinated responses to challenges impossible to organize. You're witnessing the beginning of what historians will later call the Great Dispersal, though it doesn't look particularly great from ground level. It looks more like a really slow-motion version of people leaving a movie theatre when the credits start rolling. Nobody wants to be the first to go, but once a few people start heading for the exits, everyone suddenly remembers they have somewhere else to be. The exodus doesn't happen all at once like some disaster movie evacuation. Instead, families start making quiet decisions about temporarily relocating to visit relatives in smaller communities. Young adults begin choosing marriage partners from outside the Cahokian system rather than within it. Craft specialists start accepting invitations to work in distant communities where their skills might be more appreciated and better compensated. Your morning routine now includes noticing which houses have been abandoned overnight, their former occupants having slipped away without formal announcements or farewell ceremonies. The population decline is becoming visible in the form of empty workshops, unused garden plots, and construction projects that stop mid-completion when the workers simply don't show up. It's like watching a city slowly deflate, except instead of air escaping, it's people. The reasons people give for leaving are usually practical rather than dramatic. The children will have better opportunities in a smaller community. My wife's family needs help with their farm. There's a position available that matches my skills perfectly. Nobody says they're fleeing a collapsing civilization. They're just making rational individual choices that collectively add up to civilizational abandonment. The social pressure to stay is weaker than you might expect. The institutions that once made Cahokian residents attractive are providing fewer benefits while demanding the same level of participation. The trade opportunities that once drew people to the city are declining as regional networks shrink. The religious experiences that once made Cahokia the spiritual centre of the region are available in modified forms elsewhere. The agricultural system begins showing the effects of population loss as labour-intensive farming techniques become impossible to maintain. Fields that require coordinated planting and harvesting by multiple families are being abandoned or converted to less productive but less labour-intensive uses. The surplus production that once supported non-agricultural specialists becomes inadequate to maintain the same level of craft production and trade. The construction projects that once demonstrated Cahokian power are being scaled back or abandoned as the workforce disperses. Monk's Mound continues to receive maintenance, but smaller mounds throughout the city are being left to erode. The plaza areas that once hosted elaborate ceremonies become too large for the remaining population to fill effectively. The trade networks that once brought exotic goods to Cahokia begin to redirect their routes toward more populous destinations. Merchants who once made regular stops in the city start skipping visits when the customer base becomes too small to justify the journey. The economic specializations that once made Cahokian products distinctive are being simplified or abandoned. The political relationships that once made Cahokia the center of regional alliances begin to shift toward emerging population centers. Communities that once sent tribute and received protection start forming new relationships with rising powers. The diplomatic influence that once extended across half the continent contracts to a much smaller sphere of direct control. Yet the people leaving aren't abandoning Cahokian culture. They're taking it with them and adapting it to new circumstances. The agricultural techniques, craft skills, religious practices, and social institutions that developed in Cahokia continue to influence regional development for generations. The dispersal doesn't destroy Cahokian civilization so much as distribute it across a wider geographic area in smaller, more sustainable communities. The question that keeps historians awake at night is whether this dispersal represents failure or adaptation. Did Cahokian civilization collapse, or did it evolve into a more distributed form that better matched environmental and social realities? The people making individual decisions to leave probably never intended to participate in a grand historical transformation. They were just trying to provide better lives for their families. You return to visit Cahokia 50 years after the Great Dispersal began, and the experience is like walking through a post-apocalyptic movie set, except the apocalypse was a really boring economic recession that lasted for decades instead of a dramatic zombie outbreak. The massive earthworks still dominate the landscape, but they now look less like monuments to human achievement and more like enormous burial mounds for a civilization that forgot to leave a forwarding address. Monk's Mound still rises majestically above the floodplain, but the structures that once crowned its summit have collapsed or been dismantled for materials. Weeds grow through the plaza stones where thousands once gathered for ceremonies. The Grand Plaza that once hosted international trade fairs now serves as grazing land for a few cows, whose owners have no idea they're walking on what was once America's version of Times Square. The residential areas that once buzzed with activity are now marked by subtle depressions in the earth, where houses once stood and scattered pottery fragments that represent the archaeological equivalent of someone's forgotten Amazon delivery. The sophisticated drainage systems that once managed urban runoff are now clogged with sediment and overgrown with vegetation. The streets that once followed careful urban planning now exist only as barely visible lines in the grass. Your exploration of the abandoned city reveals how quickly nature reclaims human construction when maintenance stops. The wooden structures that once housed 50,000 people have rotted away or been scavenged for materials by later inhabitants. The earthworks that required millions of hours of human labour are slowly eroding under the impact of rain, wind, and seasonal freeze-thaw cycles. The craft workshops that once produced goods traded across half the continent are now marked only by concentrations of waste materials. Broken pottery, metal scraps, and stone tool fragments that represent the industrial archaeology of a pre-industrial society. The storage facilities that once held surplus food for lean years are now filled with dirt and debris, their sophisticated ventilation systems no longer functional. The ceremonial areas that once connected earth to sky through elaborate rituals are now unremarkable patches of ground that only trained archaeologists could identify as having special significance. The astronomical alignments that once tracked celestial cycles with scientific precision are now known only to the deer and rabbits that use the mounds as convenient observation posts. The canals and water management systems that once made urban life possible in this location have silted up or been repurposed for agricultural drainage. The sophisticated, Engineering that once supported dense population has been replaced by much simpler systems designed for scattered rural settlements. The urban infrastructure that once rivaled anything in the medieval world has been abandoned for more basic technologies. Yet traces of Cahokian influence persist throughout the region in ways that would be invisible to casual observation. The agricultural techniques developed here continue to support population centres hundreds of miles away. The craft traditions that flourished in the city influence artistic development across the Mississippi Valley. The social institutions that coordinated urban life provide models for political organisation in smaller communities. The people who once lived here didn't simply vanish. They dispersed to smaller communities throughout the region, carrying their knowledge, skills and cultural traditions with them. The pottery styles, architectural techniques, and religious practices that characterize Cahokian civilization continue to evolve in dozens of scattered locations. The urban experiment may have ended, but the cultural innovations it generated continue to influence regional development. The question of what happened to Cahokia becomes less mysterious when viewed from this perspective. The civilization didn't collapse catastrophically. It dispersed gradually as people made rational decisions to seek better opportunities elsewhere. The urban centre lost its population, but the culture it fostered spread throughout a much wider area, adapted to local conditions and environmental realities. You're standing in what will become one of archaeology's greatest puzzles, watching the final chapters of a story that future scientists will spend centuries trying to reconstruct from pottery shards and soil stains. The irony is delicious. Here you are, witnessing the actual end of Cahokian civilization. While 800 years in the future, PhD students will write entire dissertations speculating about what you're seeing with your own eyes. The abandonment process you're observing is so gradual and undramatic that future archaeologists will struggle to pinpoint exactly when Cahokia ended. There's no burned layer indicating conquest, no mass graves suggesting epidemic disease, no evidence of environmental catastrophe, just the slow archaeological equivalent of a long drawn-out goodbye text conversation that eventually trails off into digital silence. The material culture being left behind will drive future researchers absolutely crazy with its lack of clear answers. The high-quality pottery that once indicated thriving craft traditions is being replaced by simpler, more utilitarian vessels that suggest economic decline but don't specify causes. The elaborate copper ornaments that once demonstrated wealth and status are being recycled or taken away, leaving gaps in the archaeological record that will spawn dozens of competing theories. The construction timeline that future archaeologists will try to reconstruct shows a pattern that looks like civilizational ADHD. Lots of ambitious projects started, modified, abandoned, and sometimes restarted with different designs. The building techniques that once followed consistent standards become increasingly variable as master craftsmen leave and are replaced by less experienced workers using simplified methods. The garbage deposits that will someday make archaeologists ecstatic contain evidence of changing diet, declining craft production, and shifting trade relationships, but they don't include any convenient written explanations about why these changes occurred. Future scientists will analyse every corn kernel and pottery fragment, building elaborate theories about climate change, political upheaval, and social transformation based on essentially circumstantial evidence. The astronomical alignments that once made Cahokia a giant calendar will puzzle future researchers who won't initially realise they're looking at scientific instruments rather than random architectural features. The sophisticated understanding of celestial mechanics, the guided construction, will be lost so completely that 20th century scientists will spend decades figuring out what their predecessors knew automatically. The population estimates that future demographers will calculate based on house foundations and garbage deposits will consistently underestimate Cahokia's peak population because the most densely inhabited areas used construction techniques that leave minimal archaeological traces. The social complexity that you can observe directly will be invisible to scientists working from material remains alone. The trade networks that you know extend across half the continent will be traceable through artifact distributions, but the social relationships that maintain these networks will be completely invisible in the archaeological record. Future researchers will be able to map the movement of goods, but will have to guess at the political, religious and kinship connections that made trade possible. The reasons for Cahokia's abandonment that seem obvious to you, economic pressures, environmental changes, social adaptations, and rational individual choices will become the subject of heated academic debates because the archaeological evidence can support multiple interpretations. Climate data will suggest environmental stress, artifact patterns will indicate economic decline, population data will demonstrate social change. But none of this evidence will definitively prove causation. The cultural continuities that you can observe as people carry Cahokian traditions to new locations will be largely invisible to future archaeologists because cultural practices don't fossilise. The civilization's influence on regional development will be underestimated because its most important contributions, knowledge, techniques, and social innovations, leave no direct archaeological traces. The tragedy isn't just that a great civilization is ending, but that its ending will be so poorly understood by future generations that some will question whether it was really that great to begin with. The complexity you're witnessing firsthand will be reduced to museum displays and textbook paragraphs that capture none of the human drama, individual struggles, and cultural achievements that made Cahokia remarkable. You're quite possibly the last person to witness Cahokia as a functioning city rather than an archaeological site waiting to be discovered. The year is approximately 1350 CE, and you're looking at what remains of the greatest urban centre in North American history during its final moments as a living community. It's like being the last customer in a restaurant that's closing forever. The lights are still on, but everyone knows the party's over. The population that once numbered in the tens of thousands has dwindled to a few hundred people scattered among the massive earthworks, like survivors in a zombie apocalypse, where the zombies were economic hardship and climate change rather than flesh-eating monsters. Entire neighbourhoods that once hummed with activity are now empty except for scavenging animals and the occasional traveller using abandoned buildings for temporary shelter. The morning routines that once involved thousands of people coordinating their activities now consist of a handful of families going about their daily business, in what feels like an enormous museum after closing time. The scale mismatch is profound. It's like trying to maintain a shopping mall when your only customers are 3 elderly people who come in for their daily walk. The agricultural systems that once fed 50,000 people are being maintained by farm families who could grow enough food for the remaining population in their backyard gardens. The elaborate field systems and irrigation networks represent massive over-engineering for current needs, like using a professional kitchen to make dinner for 2 people. Most of the agricultural infrastructure is being abandoned or converted to simpler uses. The monumental architecture that once inspired awe now seems almost oppressive in its emptiness. Monksman looms over the sparse population like a cathedral built for giants, its summit platforms designed for ceremonies that no longer attract enough participants to justify the effort of climbing to the top. The Grand Plaza could hold sporting events, but there aren't enough people left to form 2 competitive teams. The trade networks that once connected Cahokia to communities across the continent have withered to occasional visits by individual merchants who remember when the city was worth the journey. The exotic goods that once flowed through the marketplace are now rare luxury items that the remaining population can neither afford nor fully appreciate. Most commerce now involves basic necessities obtained from nearby communities. The craft traditions that once produced objects of stunning beauty and technical sophistication are being maintained by a few elderly specialists whose knowledge will die with them, because there aren't enough young people interested in learning skills for which there's no longer adequate demand. The workshops that once hummed with productive activity are mostly silent. The religious ceremonies that once drew participants from hundreds of miles away are now performed by the remaining residents more out of habit than conviction. The spiritual significance of the site remains, but the social energy that once made ceremonies meaningful has dissipated. The connections between earth and sky that once seemed so important now feel academic. The social institutions that once coordinated complex urban life are operating far below their intended capacity, like running a university with only enough students for a single classroom. The political structures designed for managing large populations are overkill for the remaining community. Most social organisation now operates through informal family networks rather than formal institutions. Yet there's something poignant about the persistence of daily life among the ruins of grandeur. People still cook meals, tend gardens, maintain their homes, and care for their children. Children still play games. Though they play them among monuments their parents remember when they were crowded with people, life continues, just at a much smaller scale. The knowledge that this was once America's greatest city is still held by the remaining inhabitants, but it's becoming increasingly abstract as the physical evidence of former greatness is slowly reclaimed by nature. Within a generation, even the oral traditions about Cahokia's peak will begin to fade as the last eyewitnesses pass away, and are replaced by people who know the place only in its diminished state. The final irony is that the people living through this end stage probably don't think of themselves as witnessing the conclusion of a great civilization. They're just living their lives, adapting to changing circumstances, making do with what they have. The historical significance of what's happening is invisible to the people experiencing it. They're too busy dealing with practical concerns to realise they're participating in one of archaeology's greatest mysteries. In another generation or two, even this small remaining population will disperse to join relatives in other communities, leaving behind only the monumental earthworks and scattered artefacts that will puzzle scientists for centuries to come. The last lights of Cahokian civilization are going out not with dramatic finality, but with the quiet exhalation of a culture that simply found better ways to meet its needs elsewhere. You step back from the timeline of Cahokia's rise and fall, and the silence that follows is profound. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of a story that has finally been told in full, from the first basket of earth carried up Monk's Mound to the last family packing their belongings, and heading toward an uncertain but hopeful future elsewhere. Standing in what is now southern Illinois, you can feel the weight of what once was beneath your feet. The shopping malls and parking lots, the suburban developments and interstate highways that cover this landscape today, rest on the dreams and ambitions of people who built something magnificent and then chose to let it go. It's like discovering that your neighbourhood grocery store was built on the site of a lost palace, except the palace was real, and the groceries are what we settled for. The earthworks are still there, of course. Monk's Mound rises above the modern world like a green hill that somehow seems too perfect to be natural. But most people driving past on Interstate 55 have no idea they're passing the remains of a city that once rivaled medieval Paris in size and sophistication. It's the ultimate historical Easter egg, hiding in plain sight while millions of people commute past it daily without a second glance. The people of Cahokia weren't so different from us, really. They worried about food prices and housing costs. They struggled with work-life balance and wondered if their children would have better opportunities than they did. They dealt with climate change and economic uncertainty. They tried to build something lasting in a world that seemed increasingly unpredictable. Sound familiar? Their story isn't just about the rise and fall of one city. It's about the eternal human struggle to create meaning and permanence in a world where everything is temporary. They succeeded beyond their wildest dreams, building a civilization that lasted longer than the United States has existed. Then they adapted when circumstances changed, showing a flexibility that many civilizations never manage. The mystery that has puzzled archaeologists for decades isn't really a mystery at all when you think about it. Cahokia didn't collapse, it transformed. The people didn't disappear, they dispersed. The civilization didn't die, it evolved into something different, something more sustainable for the changing world they faced. Maybe that's not failure, maybe that's wisdom. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, think about the cycles of building and rebuilding, growth and adaptation, permanence and change that define human experience. The people who built Cahokia understood something we often forget, that the measure of a civilization isn't how long it lasts unchanged, but how successfully it adapts when change becomes necessary. Their voices have been silent for 600 years, but their story echoes across time with a message both humbling and hopeful. Even the greatest achievements are temporary. Even the most successful civilizations eventually transform into something new. Even the most mysterious disappearances usually have perfectly rational explanations involving ordinary people making sensible decisions about their lives. The earthworks will outlast us all, silent monuments to human ambition and adaptation. The corn still grows in the fields around Cahokia, using techniques refined by people whose names we'll never know. The rivers still flow along the same paths they followed when canoes heavy with copper and shells plied their waters. The cycles continue, as they always have, as they always will. Rest well. Tomorrow you'll wake up in a world built on the accumulated wisdom of countless forgotten civilizations, each one contributing something essential to the ongoing human story. Cahokia's chapter may have ended, but the book continues, written by people like you who face the same eternal challenges of building, adapting and enduring in a world that never stops changing. The last light hasn't gone out. It never does. It just moves somewhere else, carried by people who refuse to give up hope, who keep building, keep trying, keep believing that tomorrow might be better than today, just like the people of Cahokia did, more than 1,000 years ago, in a city that rose from nothing and returned to Earth, leaving only stories and the endless human determination to begin again. Sweet dreams. Thank you for joining us on this journey through America's greatest lost city. If you enjoyed exploring the mysteries of the past, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories from the forgotten corners of history. Drop a comment letting us know where you're listening from. It's always amazing to see how these ancient stories connect us across time and distance. Until next time, keep wondering, keep exploring, and keep dreaming of the civilizations that came before us and the ones yet to be built.